project is 3-2. And this is a lot of work done by my student Tamina, so thank you very much for all this hard work. And we have been thoroughly supported by the entire team. So that would be Ali, Miranda, Jen, Heng, and Marissa. So thank you for all the inputs. So I know Wayne's kind of stole part of my introduction, but that's kind of the way it goes. That's fine, right? So we know that, the rural areas have the low population density, limited transportation infrastructure, long travel distances, and limited transit, both because of the distance and the funding, and potentially even getting the workforce to drive the buses. All this gives us limited options to reach the jobs, health appointments, and so on. And I think we all conceptually know this, right? This is all based on logic, and it's also based in reality. So our big question to everyone is, so what does that actually mean to an individual who lives there? So in conjunction with Dr. McBride and her student, Janai Pittman, we conducted 43 semi-structured interviews of community leaders and residents, primarily from Greensboro, Alabama, and Eden, North Carolina, which have different population densities. We really tried for Georgia also, but they were not responsive. We tried, in South Carolina, we could get interviews for Greenville, but Greenville's not rural. So we struggled a lot, but Janai and Miranda really came through and helped us out a lot. So our interviews covered trip behaviors and key destinations, some service awareness, and the gaps. We looked at transportation barriers and community-led mobility solutions. And also, we were able to interview 17 transit providers and planners with the same questions, so we could look at differences in perception and perspective between the potential users and the providers. And here we actually got one from Georgia, so we're pretty excited. So here's some of what was said. So the modes of transportation, I know everyone kind of expected the drive only to be the main mode of transportation, and indeed it was. Even though many of the locations we were drawing from only, they have about 10% of households without access to personal vehicles. So on top of that, so our providers told us that about 30% of their particular community members in those counties had no access to personal cars, or they share a single vehicle among multiple adults. So here's one story for you. So as a single mom, I would walk 30 minutes to the bus stop, then take a 2-hour trip to the mall. And so every day I had basically 3 hours on each side of my 8 to 10 hour workday just for transportation. So when did they see their kid? Okay, not great for particularly being a single parent. So thinking about then the financial implications for individuals. We have one person who said that they get up at 5:30 and walk 20 minutes to the bus stop, then then walk another 15 minutes to work, then repeat the same journey at the end of the day. Then rideshare is the only other option they have, and that would be $18 a day. And $36, and that's one way. So $36 is basically my tips for the entire day. So she would spend all of her tips on transportation. So the big question that came to her mind was, what's the point of working if it all gets consumed just by transportation? Okay. On the provider side, they were sticking up for their community members as well, saying if you don't have money for transportation, you don't have money because you don't have transportation, right? So you don't have money to get to a job, and then you can't have, without a job, you can't have money for transportation. Round and round it goes. And then they were also pointing out the importance of transit that they do offer, saying basically if people lose this ability to have transit, they will also lose their job, childcare, and so on. So the challenges with available transit services are vehicle reliability, having a limited number of transit vehicles, lack of walkability in the community, lack of weekend service and insufficient operating hours, and a few people said none. Questions or answers could overlap. Okay. So note that some people really do appreciate the services that are offered, but they can't be offered all the time. Right, so that was a challenge. And note that less than 40% of community respondents indicated that service would be. So that's a lot of non-convenient transportation. So in terms of going back to the vehicle reliability, picking up on that topic, you know, when the service is delayed, right? We know congestion, everything else can make service delayed, but it seems like also breakdowns can have major implications. So a couple of stories here. We had a scheduled ride for a person that had a disability, so they were accompanied by somebody to help them out. So it was delayed for nearly 4 hours, leaving the passenger somewhere without access to food and without access to restroom facilities, and their caregiver ended up having to miss work. This is a pretty uncomfortable situation. Then another person told us that they can be waiting forever for a bus, and by the time it finally shows up and gets me to the clinic, so a health appointment, the whole day is already gone. Some days the appointment gets canceled while I'm still standing there waiting. I've been hit with missed appointment fees because the ride didn't show up. So they're missing their appointment and they're being charged. So some real implications for not having good transit service available. But before you go out and create a new service, here's some things to think about. So about 70% of community members reported that they either have poor or costly internet service. And one of the providers said that they're at about 98% broadband, but there's an aging population that's not as familiar with technology. So we have to be careful with relying on apps for people who may not be comfortable with them. Okay, and then they have some suggestions for improvements of the transit. So the left ones, I think, are where microtransit could come into play. So this could help with service expansion. It could be adjacent to ride sharing. Could help with frequency of service and hopefully more timely service. So we borrowed the picture from NCA, so I'll put that on our overall slide. And basically what we did was we started an optimization, and we saw at the lunchtime presentation, optimization still has a role. It's not all AI all the time. Okay. So we considered it an isolated microtransit service to start with, and it wasn't going to follow a fixed route. So we treated it like a door-to-door type of service. Okay, and we also considered both user and provider perspectives as potential objectives. All right, so we solved it as a preemptive goal programming approach. And we looked at, from the user perspective, that we try to minimize unserved requests. We try to minimize excess passenger travel time. And we also, from the provider's perspective, try to minimize the cost overrun. And we looked at different combinations of those goal structures. In terms of constraints, we have the customer has to be either picked up once or they're considered unserved. We didn't want multiple vehicles going to the same pickup location once the person's already gone. All right, so then we also assumed that the passengers would have an actual pickup window. So this might help the people who have to get to an appointment on time, like I need to be picked up between this time and this. We also made sure that people who got on one bus were also getting off of that same bus. And so on. Okay, so on the input side, one thing that I really want you to notice, because it comes into play in the discussion of the results, is the different operating costs for the different environments that we looked at. Okay, so obviously the rural areas have the lower operating cost, and we looked at Manhattan, so obviously the urban costs will have the most, right? So we're trying to make sure that we could get the full span of tests as to what is the most successful environment and what does it take. We also set some targets in terms of the passenger travel time would take no more than 30 minutes ideally, and that the target operational cost will be about 80% of that cost. For boarding and alighting time, for the results that I'm going to share with you, we assume that it takes 1 minute to get on and 1 minute to get off. And then I think Tamina's poster later on today will be like 3 minutes each side. So you can see again that our environments have different population densities and different transportation network densities. So demand is generated randomly, and that includes the location of the pickup, the location of the drop off, and how many people are going to get on at the pickup location. Okay, so how did we do in the different environments? I'm sure it's not really a surprise that our dense urban, which is the Manhattan area, we were able to serve more, right? Better or denser transportation system made it so that we could have shorter paths and be able to do the whole pickup and drop off. But as you saw from the cost itself, the cost overrun for the dense urban area was higher than it was for the other areas. And a lot of that is going to come back to just how much is it cost to run a system in Manhattan versus how much is it cost to run a system in cheaper areas. Okay, and then our higher travel time exceedance for the rural area is a function of that transportation network. And we were not able to serve as many, so some of the cost overruns for sure. So what does it cost to meet the request? So when you set the priority at minimizing unserved requests, naturally the cost will go up. But what you can see is when you start analyzing on the map, say, oh, well, maybe I just need more buses. Right, so all the red ones here are unserved. And so that's something that we're looking into is more on the specifics. In our initial set of results, we have scenarios where we get 1 vehicle, 2 vehicles. So the one thing to note is that we are still missing some customer pickups. We are not able to solve all of the world's problems with microtransit. Okay, so the things to think about are like, what's the spatial distribution of the demand? And if we are getting too many requests in a close time frame, or the pickup windows are too tight, we won't be able to serve everybody with a limited fleet size. Okay, and so in the graph that you see on the right, these are the different areas, and higher green is better, lower orange is better. So we have some cases where we're successful in not running over cost, and some where we are really over cost in the Manhattan area. So, you know, there will be still trade-offs. Okay, so what if we wanted to stay within budget? Right, if we wanted to stay within the target, naturally we would serve fewer customers, but the question is going to be, where are they, and are we really serving the people who need that service and can't be served by other transit options. Okay, and what does the demand pattern do to our success? Right, so we found out that high demand, being 3 to 5 passengers per request, we had a capacity of 6. So it's pretty tight. They would perform the best in our smaller city, which was Eden, North Carolina, and the dense urban area, while the medium demand worked better in our rural area in Alabama. And overall, our urban areas were able to achieve higher success across most of the demand levels, which is, again, as expected. So you may be looking at this mixed, mixed case in the far right and saying, hey, that's kind of weird that the mixed case did better than the clustered demand. Well, that's because it spreads the requests more evenly, while your clustered demand can make the routing harder, and the pickup windows also come in. And then what we need to do as a next step is to do a lot more runs and make sure that the randomness of all of this demand holds true with these single point observations that you see here. So next we looked at the order of our user-centric considerations as to whether you would do better if you were looking at unserved requests, but willing to travel or have a higher travel time exceeds for each of your customers or on average. And then also what happens if you look at the travel time for those you are able to pick up versus how many people you're serving. And all of this is plotted against the cost overruns. So generally what you'll see is that if we are working on still the actual getting to people, then that gives you a higher cost. But the user-centric, where you are working on the travel time, is better aligned with the provider perspective. So overall, what does this mean? So there are still trade-offs between our user and provider perspectives. Staying within budget requires serving fewer people, while serving more people requires more resources. And if we're looking at the tested cases, we still have some individuals unserved, even when prioritizing unserved requests. Again, we have to consider the locations, the time window relative to other requests, number of vehicles that we have, and the vehicle capacity constraints. Okay, and in our situation, we did not accept requests if the vehicle could not arrive within that time window. So we didn't allow that time window to be violated. And then the characteristics that seem to be the most promising for microtransit in smaller areas include having a mixed spatial distribution of requests. The more flexible the time window, the more successful we were in meeting their needs, and having some moderate demand. So what does that mean for our interviewees? We could reduce some of that waiting and in-vehicle travel time. Because our pickups and drop-offs were at their exact request locations and the exact desired location, drop-off location. Our paths were flexible rather than being fixed throughout transit. And we explicitly were trying to reduce excess travel time beyond a target. What we didn't explicitly consider is the vehicle reliability. So it's always possible that no matter what vehicle you have, it's going to break down at some point. So if we do have vehicles in our fleet without any reserve vehicles, we could also be subjecting our potential users to long out of vehicle delays. And then to deal with the capacity constraints effect on customer serve, we could consider having a fleet of varying sizes. And we could also coordinate with other services like existing transit. So overall recommendations for future directions with this microtransit is look at coordinating the new service with existing services. Think about how comfortable your potential users are with technology. Consider how the new services would be advertised and whether that advertising campaign would reach those most in need of those mobility options. And test the reliability of your vehicles, so that people will avoid missed appointments and missed appointment fees, lost wages, and so on. And also think about how to sustain the service beyond a trial period, because neither your transit providers nor your potential users have much money for new transportation. That is all. So thank you to the team.